Trade tensions between the United States and Canada are suddenly spiraling into something far bigger than tariffs, and major American industries are already starting to feel the damage. Canadian consumers are rejecting U.S. products at record levels, whiskey exports are collapsing, distilleries are slowing production, and Canada may now be preparing a massive oil export shift toward Asia that could weaken America's long-held energy advantage. But what makes this situation especially dangerous is that the fallout may eventually hit supply chains, manufacturing costs, and even the automotive sector across North America. Your roadmap to the latest in auto, welcome to Highway Herald. And here are the developments rapidly reshaping the economic alliance between America and Canada. Canada's consumer revolt. U.S. brands suddenly collapse. What shocked policymakers most was that this trade fight did not begin with an official embargo or a government ban. Instead, it exploded from the ground up through Canadian consumers themselves. The backlash spread rapidly across provinces, and the numbers now hitting American industries are staggering. U.S. wine exports to Canada reportedly collapsed by 78% during 2025, plunging from roughly $460 million to just over $100 million in only a year. Spirit sales suffered an even harder hit, with several American whiskey brands watching exports dry up almost overnight. For enthusiasts who follow industrial economics the same way gearheads follow horsepower figures, this resembles a supply chain breakdown driven entirely by public sentiment. Distilleries in Kentucky are already slowing production as inventories rise and overseas demand weakens. What began as political frustration has transformed into a national buying movement that Washington never seriously anticipated. But consumer boycotts were only the beginning. Behind the scenes, political rhetoric between both countries was about to intensify even further. Washington's trade pressure, Canada pushes back hard. The rhetoric between both countries intensified dramatically once American officials began publicly accusing Canada of economic retaliation. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer grouped Canada alongside China during congressional discussions, signaling a major deterioration in tone between two historically integrated allies. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick added fuel to the fire by condemning Canada's refusal to stock American liquor products. Instead of intimidating Canadian leaders, however, the pressure appears to have hardened resistance even further. Prime Minister Mark Carney pushed back forcefully, arguing that Canada would not negotiate from a position of weakness or simply accept economic pressure from Washington. For many Canadians, the frustration runs deeper than tariffs alone. Donald Trump's earlier comments suggesting the United States did not need Canadian energy, manufacturing, or resources left a lasting impression. Combined with threats toward Canadian auto jobs, those remarks helped transform trade disagreements into something far more personal and politically charged across the country. But while headlines focused on wine, whiskey, and political retaliation, Canada quietly began preparing a much larger strategic shift that could reshape North America's energy future. Canada's oil pivot, America's energy grip, weakens. While most headlines focused on collapsing whiskey and wine sales, Canada quietly started exploring something with far bigger long-term consequences, redirecting its energy future away from overwhelming dependence on the United States. Alberta is now examining multiple pipeline routes capable of transporting roughly 1 million barrels of oil per day toward Pacific export terminals, with Prince Rupert emerging as a major contender. For decades, American refiners benefited from Canada's limited export options because discounted Canadian crude had few destinations beyond U.S. markets. But the completion of the Trans Mountain expansion already started shifting that balance by giving Canada greater access to Asian buyers, especially China. For industry watchers and automotive enthusiasts alike, this matters because energy pricing directly impacts manufacturing, logistics, transportation costs, and refinery economics. Canada increasingly sees itself not merely as America's supplier, but as a global energy heavyweight competing on world market pricing. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this deep dive, make sure to subscribe to Highway Herald and turn on notifications. Your support helps us continue covering the vehicle industry, global trade shifts, and the economic forces reshaping the automotive world. And the deeper this story goes, the clearer it becomes that these events are no longer isolated trade disputes. They are part of a much broader economic realignment. North America's economic split. Supply chains start cracking. What makes this situation so important is that these developments are no longer isolated trade disputes. The consumer boycotts, pipeline expansion talks, energy diversification strategies, and harsher political rhetoric are all interconnected parts of a wider economic realignment. For decades, the United States maintained enormous leverage because Canada depended heavily on American infrastructure, refineries, and consumers. Now, Canada appears increasingly determined to reduce that dependence through stronger ties with Asia and Europe while building greater domestic resilience. Ironically, Washington's own aggressive trade pressure may be accelerating the process. American wineries are losing critical export markets, distilleries are slowing production, and refiners may eventually face higher crude costs if discounted Canadian supply declines. Even the automotive industry could feel the impact because Ontario remains deeply integrated into North America's vehicle manufacturing ecosystem. Supply chains optimized over decades suddenly look more politically fragile and economically vulnerable than many automakers expected. And once supply chains, energy routes, and consumer behavior begin shifting simultaneously, the long-term consequences become far harder to reverse. Verdict: North America's trade alliance starts breaking. The biggest lesson from this entire situation is how quickly economic alliances can start shifting once public sentiment, energy markets, and political pressure collide. Washington likely assumed its dominance in North American trade would remain untouchable for decades. But Canada's response is revealing how fast leverage can change when consumers and industries begin moving in different directions. What started as tariff disputes and alcohol boycotts is now evolving into something much larger involving global energy strategy, industrial independence, and long-term geopolitical positioning. Once trade routes, refinery supply chains, and consumer habits start changing, reversing them becomes incredibly difficult. Canada increasingly appears determined to operate not simply as America's economic extension, but as an independent player with multiple strategic partners worldwide. And if these trends continue accelerating, the long-term balance of economic power across North America could eventually look very different from the one both countries relied on for generations. Now we want to hear from you. Do you think Canada's boycott movement will permanently damage American brands in Canada? Could Canada's growing oil exports to Asia eventually weaken America's energy advantage? And how much risk do you think political tensions pose to North America's automotive supply chains moving forward? Share your thoughts and experiences down in the comments section below. If you found this video insightful, be sure to subscribe to Highway Herald for the latest vehicle updates and in-depth analyses. Your support helps us bring you the best in automotive content. Thanks for watching and see you next time. You can now check out any of the videos on the screen. There's more exciting and informative content waiting for you here on Highway Herald.